Hi, Robert here with Delagify and Way2CPA. Today I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite movies about accounting, Office Space. For anybody who hasn't seen the movie, accounting-related spoilers ahead. Three folks go to work at Initech but hate their jobs. They find out that they're getting laid off due to some consultants. They vow to get revenge against the company by uploading a computer virus that steals money from the customers. They think they're about to get caught when a mysterious fire destroys all the evidence and they live happily ever after. Hello to anybody studying for the CPA exam, working out there, or thinking about a career in accounting. I started these videos to give you a better idea of how realistic accounting in the movies really is. All right, I'll watch the movie now.
Lumberg's gonna have me work on Saturday. I can tell already. I'm gonna end up doing it.
Peter's very concerned about coming in on Saturday. He must not be an accountant. You know what they say about accountants during busy season. If you don't come in on Saturday, don't bother coming in on Sunday because you're fired.
We're all screwed, that's what. You have to interview with this consultant. They call them efficiency experts, but what you're really doing is interviewing for your own job.
Tom, every week you say you're going to lose your job and you're still here.
Not this time. I bet I'm the first one laid off.
Okay, so they're talking about layoffs and downsizing. This is usually a last resort for businesses for a couple of reasons. As a company, it looks like they're not as strong if they have to lay off employees or do other adjustments. The other reason they want to avoid it, especially for skilled labor, is it's hard to rehire those people. So sometimes you just keep those engineers around even if they're not really producing because it's hard to find new ones. There's really three ways that businesses like to cut labor costs. The first and most obvious is pay cuts or pay freezes. This saves you money because there's not direct cash going out to your employees, but also this might encourage some of those employees to leave the company on their own, and once they're out of there, you don't have to pay them. Number two is downsizing through attrition. Basically, you make a pledge that whenever somebody quits, we're not going to hire anybody new and reduce the overall size of the department. The downside to attrition is it takes a while to get going, and employees don't like having to do extra work as everybody's leaving. The third one is early pension buyouts. These are less common, but it's actually what I used to do. The way it works is we find folks who are close to retirement and offer them extra years of service in exchange for retiring early. What happens is they leave their job and start collecting a pension. They're still getting paid by the company, but that's now coming out of the pension account and not the operating budget, so the business can look like they're more profitable that way.
So then you must physically bring them to the software people.
Well, no. Yeah, I mean, sometimes.
What would you say you do here?
These consultants are doing something called a performance audit. At least that's what this reminds me of. There's some other services that businesses offer that are similar, but in general, this is pretty much a performance audit. Usually it's an accountant or MBA who does this type of thing. They generally don't call them performance audits because the word audit makes people uncomfortable. But the whole idea behind it is you go into a business unit, really understand everything that they're doing.
Tell us a little more.
You understand the risks associated with what they're doing, what their costs are and what their outputs are, and then make recommendations to improve it.
Stock option equity sharing program. Would that do anything for you?
I don't know, I guess.
My one criticism about the Bobs is that when you're actually doing this type of audit, it's really important to establish a relationship with your auditee and make sure everybody understands we're on the same team and we just want what's best for the company. The Bobs aren't really shown doing that in this movie.
The worst they would ever do is they would put you for a couple of months into a white-collar, minimum security resort. Shit, we should be so lucky. Do you know they have conjugal visits there? Really? Yes.
I'm a free man. I haven't had a conjugal visit in 6 months.
I work in the criminal justice system. Resort prisons are not a thing. You don't want to go to prison. Even minimum security prison is a pretty nasty place to be, especially for an accountant. If you do find yourself in the position of having committed fraud and needing to face consequences, I would say the easiest consequence is going directly to probation. If you go directly to probation, you have a lot of hoops to jump through, but none of them are as bad as prison for sure. They're also going to expect that you're going to pay back all the money that you stole. It's different for different states, but where I worked in Colorado, you would be on probation for 30 years until you paid all the money back. It's still no walk in the park. Plan A is just don't do fraud.
Well, how does it work?
It's pretty brilliant. What it does is every time there's a bank transaction where interest is computed, and there are thousands a day, the computer ends up with these fractions of a cent, which it usually rounds off. But what this does is it takes those little remainders and puts it into an account.
Here's the good stuff. Here's the fraud. Unfortunately, this is extremely unrealistic. I did some searching. I have never found an instance of someone being successful with this type of scheme. It's funny, it has a name to it as part of an urban myth called penny shaving. And basically, you're taking a little bit off of each transaction. There are ways where that actually works, primarily in skimming schemes. If you're in a cash business, instead of ringing up the full amount, you ring up a slightly smaller amount and pocket the difference. That's called a skimming scheme. That you can maybe get away with. This would not work. There are two reasons that this would absolutely not work. First, big businesses tend to recalculate their interest, and if there's a problem with the interest, they will let the bank know right away. Second, auditors do randomly pull account information. Anytime you looked at the debits and credits associated with this virus, you would see 3 lines. 2 of them you would expect. You'd see interest expense and a customer's account. But then you would see Peter's account every single time, and that would really, as an auditor, make you scratch your head of, why is there a penny on every single transaction? The system is going to be keeping it together, so you're always going to see this every time you pull an interest expense. It's going to show up and people are going to find it. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, what about materiality? Where if something is so small that it wouldn't show up, we don't need to investigate it. We don't need to look into it any further. If you were looking at a multi-million-dollar company and there's a line item for 50 cents, that would be really weird and you wouldn't expect to see it, and you don't care as an investor. You might say, well, a penny is certainly immaterial. Yes, that's true, but in the audit, this would show up in half of the transactions. Anything showing up in half of the transactions is going to raise some flags for those external auditors, and they're going to want to look into this further.
This sounds familiar.
Yeah, they did in Superman 3.
Right.
Yeah. Underrated movie, actually. And then there were a bunch of hackers that did in the 70s as well. One of them got busted.
Well, so they checked for this now.
No, here's the thing. Initech's so backed up with all the software we're updating for the year 2000, they'd never notice.
You're right.
There is kind of a real element to this that the AICPA had to make special procedures for. There's a special report called the Systems and Organization Controls Report, or a SOC report, that tells us it's safe. We have somebody looking over this, so you can't just stick in a floppy disk and change everything.
One of the things we'd look for is change management.
Basically, if you're putting in a new accounting system, you want to make sure that this can't happen. You want to make sure that this never happens in the first place. There's a lot that goes into making sure that that's safe.
So you're stealing?
No, you don't understand. It's very complicated. It's aggregate, so I'm talking about fractions of a penny here, and over time, they add up to a lot.
Oh, okay. So you're gonna make a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
Right? That's not yours?
Well, it becomes ours.
How is that not stealing?
Now here it is. Fraud is a victimless crime. It's just like punching a guy in the dark. Really, in this fraud scheme, there are hundreds or thousands of victims, and even though he's only taking a little bit of money from each of them, he is taking money from each of them. It might not have that big of an impact on any one person's life, but he's taking something that doesn't belong to him, and that's stealing.
I think we're screwed.
Is there some way to just give the money back?
What, do you mean just hand them a check for the exact amount they're missing? I think they'd figure that out.
Well, we have to do something.
Maybe we could launder the money.
That's a great idea. Okay, how do we do that?
I don't know.
Now they're caught and they want to launder the money back into the company. Money laundering might have been smart for this scheme, but the ship has already sailed. We saw earlier in the movie that this went into Peter's bank account. Once the money went into Peter's bank account, there's already a trail tracing him to the fraud And it doesn't matter what he does with it after that. That's going to be enough to tell investigators to start asking him questions and start pulling as many records as they can. What would have been smarter is to have hundreds or thousands of fake bank accounts that he could drain on a daily basis, weekly basis, and make sure that he's just taking out small amounts from those. I want to take a moment to talk about laundering money back into the company. This has actually happened in the past, but in a very different circumstance. Very famous guy, Crazy Eddie Antar, one of my favorite fraudsters, was skimming money off the top and not paying taxes on it. Later on, he changed his mind and said, well, if I pay those taxes, I can get more investors. So he tried to put the money back into the company. He probably could have gotten away with skimming and taking the money out without paying taxes, but when he put the money back in, he got caught. In this instance, laundering the money back would really not be helpful for Peter. The whole idea behind money laundering is you want to hide where something came from. If they're hiding it and sneaking it back into the bank accounts, the investigators won't see it, and the investigators are going to keep looking until they find something, either the money coming out or the money going back in. If you were going to repay it, you would want to do it in a really conspicuous way. For example, Peter could bring to their attention that there was this error, not a malicious error, just an error, honest mistake. That might help get him off the hook. His best case scenario might be confessing and giving the money back. I've found that judges tend to be more lenient if, one, you pay the victims back, and two, you say that you're sorry.
You were right about that computer scam. That was a bad idea.
Now, something that this movie shows really well is a concept known as the fraud triangle. The fraud triangle says that folks only commit fraud if three conditions are met. They have some sort of perceived pressure, they have some sort of perceived opportunity, and they've rationalized their behavior. This movie does a really good job of showing us all three of those elements. The pressure is they're losing their jobs.
What's to stop you from doing this?
It's not worth the risk. I got a good job.
What if you didn't have a good job?
Gobblers.
They're going to need money to continue living. The opportunity is nobody pays attention to the software developers, so they can sneak something by the system.
Well, so they check for this now.
No, here's the thing. Initech's so backed up with all the software we're updating for the year 2000, they'd never notice.
You're right. And even if they wanted to, they couldn't check all that code.
The rationalization is that Initech is an evil, soul-sucking job and deserves to get ripped off.
It just seems wrong.
It's not wrong. Initech is wrong. Initech is an evil corporation.
Once those three elements are there, a person will then make the decision to commit fraud.
I'm gonna take the blame for it, I decided. I'm on my way now to return the money and leave a confession under Lundberg's door.
There's this mysterious fire. We find out who did it. It's not Peter. I don't want to spoil the movie, though. What they're implying is that the fire wiped out all evidence and Peter and his friends are going to get off scot-free. Why would that be the case? Banks have tons of backups. Sure, the fire destroyed the confession, but they're still going to be looking for the accounting error, and now they're going to be looking even closer because they think there's a case of arson related to the case of fraud. Banks have some of the most robust backups in the world, and think about why that is. How would you feel if one day you went into the bank and the banker said, excuse me, we forgot how much money's in your account. Could you please tell us? That would never, ever happen. The bank needs to know how much is in everybody's account, including Peter's account, and they need to know the history of Peter's account. They certainly have multiple backups that even if some of the data was in this building, it wouldn't be all of the data and it wouldn't be all of the backups.
No, man.
It pains me to do this because this movie is so funny, but it's not very good at portraying accounting. Overall, I would give it a D-. On the plus side, they portray the fraud triangle very accurately and very completely.
Boy, that's just a straight shooter with upper management written all over him.
On the negative side, we rarely see consultants who act like the Bobs.
I'll have this here.
Number two, that fraud scheme would never work.
We weren't thinking clearly.
And number three, the fire would not cover their tracks.
We're screwed.
They would still be in trouble. It is a very funny movie, though. You should go out, watch it, and buy it.
Thanks.
Thanks for watching today. I really appreciate it. And do be sure to like and subscribe. It helps the channel out quite a bit. And as a reward in advance, here's a clip that reminds me of busy season.
Every single day of my life has been worse than the day before it.
I hate this goddamn job and I don't need it.
Down in a drop top, Benz hitting switches in my black 6'4".